Faye Heffele is a longtime Toastmaster who enjoys using humor in all areas of her life. Her membership in Humor Mill Toastmasters Club has enabled her to hone her craft. Consequently, Faye has been able to perform a number of stand-up comedy routines in local venues, and she participated in many humorous and tall tale speech contests, which I hope she will compete again this year. Today, Faye will be giving us a number of helps for you to use in your speech presentation. Not only will she give us useful information, which you can jot down on your handout, but she will also demonstrate the use of these humor tools throughout her speech so that you can see for yourself how humor helps. Please welcome distinguished Toastmaster Faye Heffele. Humor me.
Okay, let's see. Working on it right now. There we go. And good morning, everyone. How are all of you today? I've been having such fun with all of the presentations today. My goal is to show you how Colleen Marie stated, laughter is the best medicine. Add humor to your speeches and you will wow your audience. Take a look at this guy. He says, I am one speaker who pleases 100% of his audience every time he speaks, 50% when I begin and 50% when I stop. Now, you really don't want to be this guy. You want to keep your audience engaged throughout your entire speech, not just at the beginning and at the end. Well, how do you do that? Well, let me tell you that strong speakers and educators incorporate humor into their speaking. Let me tell you a story. Back when I was in high school, I had lots of different teachers, but two of them stand out for me. One was my history teacher. He spoke in a very boring voice. He sat behind his desk reading from the materials, and it was so boring that I had a really tough time staying engaged throughout that whole class. It's the only class I got a C in, and I'm surprised I even got a C in that class. The other teacher that stands out in my memory was one of my English teachers. She spoke with animation. She spoke with humor in her voice. She engaged us with activities. And I remember that class. And guess what? I got an A in that class. It was so much fun. I was engaged, and it was partly due to that humor. There's lots of speakers who inspire using humor. You can find all kinds of them. One of my favorites is Brene Brown. She said, the only universal language I know that wraps up joy and gratitude and love is laughter. And absolutely true. I know that when I laugh, I am inspired. And I hope to inspire my audiences when I give them humor. Another speaker that I enjoy listening to is John Cleese. He said, if I can get you to laugh with me, you like me better, which makes you more open to my ideas. And how true is that? Do you enjoy listening to someone that you don't really like? No. But when somebody makes you laugh, you are engaged. You are more likely to be inspired by what I say. So therefore, why do you use humor? Like BJ said, you need to have a good message of your speech. And humor can help you get that message across. There have been a number of studies that show that humor does help you. In 2021, the Graduate School of Comprehensive Studies at the University of Tsukuba, Japan, did an evaluation of TED Talks. Now, you all are pretty familiar with TED Talks, I'm sure. You've listened to more than one and probably several. So you have an idea of the quality of speakers that there are in the TED Talks. Well, this study found that popular TED Talks used humor an average of 12.92 times in their talks. That's pretty good. 13 times in a talk, they used humor. What about the less popular TED Talks? They used humor 3.92 times. What that means is the popular TED Talks use humor 3 times more than the less popular TED Talks. Now, I wonder why that is. 3 times more effective is a pretty fantastic statistic, in my opinion. So why do you want to use that humor? Well, it engages your audience. It brings them in, draws them in. You want them in the palm of your hand. Maya Angelou said, "I've learned that people will forget what you said. People will forget what you did, but people will never forget how you made them feel." And that, to me, is very, very true. BJ talked about that. How do emotions make people feel? If you make them feel good, they're going to remember you. And then they're going to remember the point of your speech. Humor also helps you to come across as more likable, like John Cleese said. It energizes your audience. Do you want to listen to a speaker who's boring? No humor in it? Well, sometimes you might if you're really interested in the point. But chances are you're going to be more energized when people insert humor into their talks. Laughter is the sun that drives winter from the human face, according to Victor Hugo. We're in the middle of winter now, and I'll tell you, looking outside at that sunshine helps make it a lot better. And if I can incorporate laughter in my speech to be that sun, to drive away the winter blues, I'm going to do that. Humor also helps audiences remember your points. Laughter has been shown to improve memory and cognitive function. And you want people to remember your talk, right? That's the whole purpose of giving your speech. And this next slide shows how bored you will be during the course of my presentation. Right. You don't want to be boring in your speech at all. You want to engage people. You want people to remember what you're saying. Use a little humor, like this slide, to bring a little life to your speech and provide emotional relief for your audience. If you're doing point after point after point in a serious talk, well-placed humor gives your audience a little bit of a break and may help engage them or re-engage them again. Breaks in that tension can be very helpful. Just like Jim talked about, getting the tension out of your body, breaking the tension of your audience is also a great thing. So your next question might be, just how do you incorporate humor into your speeches? Well, I have a few ideas for you today. Just remember, though, you are not a stand-up comic. There is a place for stand-up at stand-up comedy clubs, open mic nights, etc. Let me tell you that it's not about telling jokes. Too many jokes actually can distract from your message. People are thinking, oh, what's the next joke going to be? What's the next joke going to be? And then they totally forget about the point that you're trying to make. So don't sacrifice your message for a joke. Will they remember the joke or the message? Some jokes may be helpful, but only if they emphasize your point. Then you want to make sure that your humor fits the talk and the audience. I'll bet most of you are familiar with this little joke. Why did the chicken cross the road? Well, why did the chicken cross the road? And what in the heck does that have to do with a humor speech other than the chicken can be funny? But does it really fit this particular speech and this audience? Probably not. But did you know that you can change up a joke to make it fit? Let me show you how. How about this slide? Why did the Toastmasters cross the road? Well, why did they? Well, let me tell you, it was to get to the speech boot camp and find out how you can use humor in your speech. That's why the Toastmasters crossed the road. So you can see that jokes can apply to your speech, but they have to fit the talk and fit the audience. Now I'm going to give you a few tips because I want you to mind your P's and a Q. First of all, personal stories. When you're preparing for a speech and talking about creating a story like BJ did earlier today, personal stories can be extremely effective and can add a little humor to your talk. Think about a time when you made a mistake, or you forgot something, or you were embarrassed. Was there something funny about that? Let me tell you a time when I was very embarrassed, and it happened to be at a Toastmaster meeting. I was going to be giving a speech, and the speech title was How to Prepare for a Speech. I was a relatively new Toastmaster. I'd gathered all my information, had all my note cards ready with all my information in there. The Toastmaster called my name, and I got up and started to walk to the front of the room, and my note cards slipped out of my hand all over the floor. There was some nervous laughter in the room, but not the kind of laughter that I wanted. What was I going to do? Well, I quickly gathered up my cards, went up to the front of the room, looked at the audience, looked down at my note cards, and discovered they were all out of order, and I hadn't numbered my cards. I took a nice deep cleansing breath, like Jim would tell us to do, and I said to my audience, the first thing you do when you're preparing for a speech is make sure that your note cards are numbered. Guess what? I got a laugh out of that. And I took another deep breath and I felt better. And secondly, I said, the next thing you want to do is make sure that you know your material so you don't even need your note cards. And my speech went better. I tell you that story today because it's a personal story. I made a mistake. I got embarrassed, but I'm using it to my advantage in this particular talk. Did you know that Toastmasters has a little tool for collecting stories? It's called the Story Collection Tool. And I found it when I was going through the humor path in Pathways. It gave me an opportunity to put down my topics, high school teachers, note card story. Remember, I told those two stories for you today and help me organize my thoughts on that. Take advantage of that story collection tool to get your personal stories. The second P, BJ alluded to this, pictures. A picture can be worth 1,000 words. I've used a few pictures in this talk if you've been paying attention and not napping. Pictures can be very, very helpful, and they don't necessarily have to be funny, but they can be. And if appropriate, it can be very helpful to your talk. And I'm going to give you a hint. Watch for more pictures in this talk. The third P, props. Pick props that are appropriate. You see my bunny ears? That's a prop. Is it appropriate for this speech? Well, probably not, except for the fact that it's funny, but it's not necessarily appropriate for this particular speech because I'm talking about how to incorporate humor into speeches. Maybe I would use it, but maybe there's a prop that's even more appropriate. For example, this one. It's a trophy I won in Toastmasters. It could be very appropriate for my speech. So think about your props and how effectively you're going to use them. Just don't overdo the props because they can be a little bit much. Play on words. That's your next P. Alliterations are very good. Did you hear what I said about pick props that are appropriate? That was an alliteration, and it was kind of funny. They don't always have to be funny, but they can add just a little bit of humor to lighten things up in your speech. Then there are acronyms. You probably know a lot of different acronyms for things. One that comes to mind is HOMES, H-O-M-E-S, for the names of the United States Great Lakes. But maybe you can come up with an acronym that is kind of funny and maybe appropriate for your talk. Hint, watch for an acronym coming up later. Then you have puns. Puns can be very, very exciting. For example, I want you to know that I am not wearing a belt today. It's right here in my hand. Because I want you to know that you always want to take off your belt when you're speaking. It shows that you do not buckle under pressure. There you go. There's an example of a pun. Lily Tomlin said, "The road to success is always under construction." That's a little bit of a pun. And thank you for the groan, Jane. And finally, your cue. Quotes. Find a funny, appropriate quote. Now, I've actually used a number of them in this particular speech, maybe more than I would have needed to, but I use them to emphasize the points that I was making. Make sure that it's funny and appropriate, and verify the accuracy because you want to give credit to the person who said the quote. Winston Churchill said, "A good speech should be like a woman's skirt, long enough to cover the subject and short enough to create interest." That's a good one. That can apply to any speech that you give. All right, now I'm sure in the back of your mind, you've got another question. Where, Faye, do you insert humor into a speech? Well, let me tell you. I've got an acronym in your handout for you. H, where? At the heading, at the very beginning. Do you remember that picture I showed you of the guy, 50% at the beginning, 50% at the end? That was there on purpose. It was to warm up you as my audience and create a bond between you and me. So think about if you can insert a little humor at the beginning of your talk. Next, you at an underlying point, and perhaps just before you're going to make a point. Why? Because laughter makes the audience more receptive. Do you remember that Phyllis Diller picture that I inserted in there? It was to tell you that you were not to be her, not to be a stand-up comedian. Laughter makes your audience more receptive to your points. So put it in right before an underlying point. M, insert humor in the middle. Why? It keeps them engaged. I'm using a little bit of humor right here in the middle of my speech. You can insert humor with props, bunny ears, or something like that. Keep them engaged. Keep them thinking, okay, what's going to be related and happening next? Oh, other places. Put humor wherever it fits in your talk. Now I'll tell you, this acronym that I'm using, HUMOR, has a little bit of humor in it. And it fits. So what is that R at the end? Rear, at the closing. Because it leaves them with a strong, lasting impression. I want you to make sure that you watch what I do at the end of my speech to leave you with that lasting impression. And so you have the acronym HUMOR. It always pays to put your ducks in a row. Humor is a rubber sword. It allows you to make a point without drawing blood, according to Mary Hirsch. So take advantage of humor. Put them into your speech. Then, of course, there's all that other stuff. Make sure that you find it funny. If you don't find it funny, maybe other people won't find it funny either. So make sure it's something that you find funny. I loved that humor acronym. That was great. Bounce it off your mentor. As Toastmasters, you probably all have at least one mentor, if not several, that you get information from and feedback. Check it out with them. Ask them, do they think that humor acronym is funny? If not, maybe you don't want to include it in your speech. But if they find it funny and you found it funny, it's probably a good thing. And then what Jim said, vocal vitality. Look at all those tips that Jim gave us today about how to incorporate more vocal vitality into your speech. And I believe I've used a few of them in my own talk today. BJ demonstrated it in her little introduction of Colleen Marie earlier. So take a look at the pitch, the volume, the emphasis that you give to particular words, because that can make a difference, especially in how you deliver your humor. There's lots of ways to deliver humor, and you want to make sure that you deliver it correctly so that your audience will get your point. Of course, you always want to think about your gestures. What makes sense for your audience, and include that. And how does that relate to your humor? Think about that. If a specific gesture is appropriate for your humor, use it. Use it, especially when you are live in front of an audience and they can see your whole body. Use those gestures. Use that to convey your emotions as well. And of course, you want to practice. Practice makes perfect, as they say, especially when you are delivering humor. The way that you say things can make or break your humor. All right. So now you've figured out what to include. You've figured out where you want to put it in your speech. And you're delivering your speech. And you're so excited. You're giving your humorous speech. And you can't hear any laughs. Guess what? When I participated in the Tall Tales contest last spring, everybody's mics were muted. I couldn't hear if anybody was laughing because my picture is there on the screen and I only saw a few people up at the top. I couldn't tell if people were laughing or not, especially if they happened to have their video off. I couldn't tell, but I had to keep going anyway. And when you do get the laughter, especially if you're in a room with a lot of people and they start laughing, stand-up comedians know this especially, and good humorous speakers know this. Don't step on the laughter. If they start laughing, let them laugh. Let them enjoy it. Wait till the laughter dies down, and then you can move on to your next point. Otherwise, they may not get your point at all. And as I said, if the laughs don't come, you just keep on going. There are going to be times when you are speaking, especially humorously, and your audience is not going to get your comments. They're not going to get the humor of what you're saying. And this might especially be true if you're speaking to more of an international audience. They may not have the same type of humor that you do. You just have to keep on going anyway. Good humor speakers know that they just have to keep on going. Now, speaking humorously is a skill that can be learned. You may be saying, but I've never been funny. I don't know how to be funny. Well, I've given you some tips today to help you learn how you can speak humorously. But you may say, Faye, that's all well and good, but I need more help than that. Where can I go to get help? Well, I am so glad that you asked because I have some tips for you. Toastmasters has a path called engaging humor. If anybody of you tried that path, I'm working on it right now. There's a lot of good stuff in there. Thank you, BJ. I see your hand raised. There's a lot of great stuff in that path. Go out there, take a look at it. Even if you don't necessarily do all the projects in that path, you can get a lot of good help there. That's where I found that story collection tool that I told you about earlier. Use your Toastmasters clubs. You're all in at least one Toastmasters club, and I know some of you are in several Toastmasters clubs. When you're practicing your speeches, you might take it from one club to another, especially if you're practicing to give an international competition speech or a humorously speaking competition speech, which is coming up this spring, by the way. Take it to those Toastmaster clubs and practice it. See where people laugh. Do they laugh where you expect them to laugh? Do they laugh where you didn't expect them to laugh? Maybe there's more humor in your speech than you thought, or maybe something didn't work so well and you need to take it out. So practice it in your Toastmasters club. Don't be afraid to give your speech multiple times, even in the same club, as you're trying to hone your speech and hone your humor. Now, if you want something even more special, there is a couple specialty humor clubs all over Toastmasters International, and we have one right here in District 6 called Humor Mill. I've been a member of this club for many, many years, and let me tell you, it has been instrumental in helping me hone my own humor. Humor Mill meets twice a month on the first and third Thursdays of the month. And what we do different than a regular Toastmaster club, we have the Toastmaster of the day give a monologue, a la Jay Leno or all those late night talk show hosts, where they give a short little monologue of some funny stuff. A lot of it is current events, and they specifically try to make it funny. It's a way for you to practice your humor. We also have improv. If you're not familiar with improvisation, it's where you're given a topic and you might be working with some other person and you have to come up with a scenario right then and there. In Humor Mill, we obviously try to make that funny in what we do, but it doesn't have to be, but it gives you the opportunity to practice that speaking on your feet, just as Table Topics does. In Humor Mill's Table Topics session, we try to make them funny. Our answers are humorous, sometimes a little off the wall, but let me tell you, it is so much fun to go to that club because we have fun throughout the whole meeting. Some of our speeches are funny. Some of them are not so funny, but that's okay because we're working through various paths, etc. But you can jazz it up when you add humor to your speaking. Listen to speeches by funny people. You can get so many ideas by listening to what other people have done. Go back and look at funny speeches that your fellow Toastmasters have done. Come to Humor Mill. Listen to what we do at our club meeting, because you'll get some ideas. You'll see where they put humor into their speech. How do they incorporate it? What types of humor do they use? What works and what doesn't? Listen to other people and look around you. Funny stuff happens all the time. Now, when I dropped my note cards, let me tell you, that was not funny at the time. It was not funny at all. But looking back on it, I see that it was kind of funny. And it gave me an opportunity to prepare that personal story to use in a future speech. There's also funny stuff that happens to other people that you may be able to incorporate into your speaking. Google can be your friend. And I say can because, as with anything on the internet, you do have to be a little careful about what you find on there. But where do you think I got the majority of the pictures that I put into this presentation? I got them off the internet. I did Google searches. I did searches for the quotes that I incorporated into my speech. I said quotes about whatever the topic is. And I found all kinds of them. And I just had to look for one that fit. So take advantage of Google. And of course, books, other sources. There's all kinds of them all over the place. I hope you have learned a few things today, because let me tell you, humor is seriously effective. I love my minion friends, and I incorporate minions because I believe that humor is seriously effective. And if you incorporate them into your story, wrap it all up with humor, putting them in different spots in your speech, you can really improve the quality of your speech. Now I'd like to open it up for some questions if anybody has any. Don't see anything in the chat. And anybody? Yeah, I heard a voice.
Faye, quick question for you. This is Nancy.
Hi, Nancy.
So how do you recover when you get up there and you're trying to be funny and you're bombing? How do you keep going?
That's an excellent question, Nancy. And believe me, it has happened to me. I was on a public stage doing a stand-up comedy routine, and a lot of my stuff totally bombed. I didn't get any laughs. And that's where my Toastmasters background really, really helped, because I've been exposed to lots of different speeches and I knew to just keep on going. And I learned from my mistakes. I took a look at the jokes that did not get the laugh and decided, well, either I didn't deliver them in the correct way, or they really weren't funny to my audience. And I took that and learned from it. And I made my stand-up comedy routines better after that. Did that answer your question, Nancy?
Yes, thank you, Faye.
Other questions? I'd be more
Hey,
than
I have
happy.
a question.
Oh, yeah.
Hi, I'm Jana, and I tuned in, and I'm glad I did today. My question for you, you mentioned in your delivery today to not step on the laugh. And in the instance where we're in the virtual world and you cannot hear the laughs to know whether or not you're stepping on them, how do you address that? Do you just allot the time for a pause there, anticipating there will be a laugh, or will that make the speech awkward? What is your advice to that?
That is a very excellent question as well. It is something that you can go either way on it. If you think that the particular thing you're going to say is going to get a laugh, try to build a pause in after that to allow for it. The pause can also just help your audience to absorb what you have said. So even if there isn't a laugh, you can do that. I'm not sure if I totally did that today, because it is extremely hard in a virtual world where you do not see all of your people. You cannot hear them laugh. You can't see the little clap sign coming up or the ha 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 emotion coming up. And so it's a tricky thing. I'd say insert a pause if you can, and the pause may not be long enough, but at least you've tried. Thank you for the question.
Thank you.
So Faye, in Toastmasters, you have almost always a very receptive audience. We want each other to succeed.
Yes.
In humor, especially in some venues, they actually want you to bomb, or at least they get more delight in it. So how do you change up your presentation, knowing that you could have two completely different kinds of audiences?
That's another good question. Knowing your audience is very, very important. And you're right, humor or Toastmasters clubs are typically very receptive. However, I have found that even in Toastmasters clubs, when you put forth some humor, people may not laugh.
Right.
And so you have to evaluate that humor afterwards. Say, okay, this joke did not get a laugh. This humor did not get a laugh. Why? Did I deliver it incorrectly, or do I need to just toss it out? I personally don't like open mic nights because of that very thing that you mentioned. People want you to bomb. Sometimes that's happened. I've been in different kinds of open mic nights. There's one called Gutties in Edina that is, the audience is very receptive. They may not laugh at everything that you say, but they're a lot more receptive than some of the other open mic nights you have to go. You have to know if you're going to be comfortable in that kind of an atmosphere. I personally don't like to go to a lot of comedy clubs just because of the negative reactions that the audience gives to many of the comedians, not just to me, but to many of the other comedians as well. And I just choose not to go there anymore. That's a choice that I've made.
Hey, I'd be curious if you've ever had this happen to you.
Yes.
The other day, we had a meeting of our club, Tail Weavers, and I had this one-liner that I thought was hilarious. And so I used it, and what it did was to jab one of the other members
Ooh.
in a not so nice way.
Mm.
And the members that were there broke into uproarious laughter when they heard it. And then one of the chat responses was, I'm glad we didn't have any guests with us tonight. And I remember when we used to jab each other like that all the time, we kind of quit doing that. And so I realized, whoops, I made a boo-boo. You ever be in that situation?
I have come close to that. I typically don't use low levels of humor in my talk, which means I don't swear, I don't talk about sex, I don't talk about any kind of thing. I try to keep my humor at a higher level. However, at one Toastmaster Club meeting at Humor Mill, thankfully it was just our current members that was there. I did actually step over my own line. Unintentionally, I did, and it was a little bit embarrassing for me to do. However, in that particular environment, I was okay. I personally have to think twice if I'm going to jab another member in the club, even if it might be a little bit funny. The time that we do that in Humor Mill is when we roast our past president. And we can jab and jab and jab, and it's all in the essence of fun in that particular case. So think about your audience, think about everybody in your audience, and especially if there are guests, will they understand? You may want to even preface your meeting with something for your guests that says, hey, in Humor Mill, we do humorous table topics. We kind of go off the wall, and you may not be used to it, but that's what we do, to let them know that this might happen in our meeting. I'm not sure if that answered your question, Timothy, but it's what I've got for you. And it looks like we're getting close to our time.
Thank you.
Are there any other questions?
I just wanted to say I'm in engaging humor, and the biggest laugh I've gotten when I've realized that things are not as funny as I think they're funny is when I said, well, I used to be funnier. And they just roared. Like in my past, I used to be funnier. It was easier. And I think that really was a truth for me. And I try. And so now my whole process is, why is that? And how did that happen? But I had given this speech about having gone through 3 months of physical therapy, and my back, which actually has a congenital defect, it was inspirational almost. And then at the end, so I dug a garden, bushes and all. I mean, I did all that after my physical therapy. And then all of a sudden, I've got these pictures of a humongous backhoe coming down the street, and they're going to dig up the yard, and they're going to dig up part of my garden. I thought that was hilarious. In real life, that was what got me through. And nobody thought it was funny. It was just like, oh, shoot. And so in my evaluations, I get, well, because this is engaging humor, it really wasn't so funny. And I just went, shoot, how am I going to be funny? Oh, well.
Kathy, that's a common point that I've experienced myself. I thought something was funny and it turned out not to be. That's where practice helps. When you try out different kinds of humor and see what works. It helps if your audience has some context that maybe they'll understand the particular kind of humor. So I just say, keep practicing, Kathy. You can be funny just like everybody else.
I think I could. It was like I just destroyed the inspiration part. They were so inspired, they couldn't laugh at me about this situation. So don't mix them up too much,
All right. Thanks, Kathy. And thank you everyone for listening today. Add humor to your speech.